All right, we're going to get started. Welcome everyone to our program today by the Nonprofit Advisory Board and BAR, the top 5 challenges facing nonprofit CEOs today. We're really glad that you could join us here today at Bernstein's beautiful DC offices. And thank you for joining us remotely by webinar today. We have a terrific panel. We're going to get into that in a minute. First, I wanted to thank a few people who worked very hard to pull this together. Not being professional meeting planners, all of us who put this thing together, it's a lot of damn work. But it was a team effort. Jordan here at Bernstein did an incredible job of organizing the space and providing facilities and providing our drinks here today. We have Donna from FAR, I'm going to introduce here in a minute, Executive Director of the FAR, the Finance and Administration Roundtable, our co-sponsor for today. Nicole from Seville was instrumental in helping with all of the registration and the marketing and the name badges and everything else. Nicole, say hi. And her colleague Veronica, who's not here today, but did a tremendous job. Of course, Justin from Capital One, who kind of the unofficial chair of our group, and does a terrific job helping to keep everything on track. Work with the caterer here today. We have a wonderful reception for you afterward, food and drinks, so we stick around for that. And then I want to also just recognize the other members of the Nonprofit Advisory Board who are here today for all of their support, intellectual support, financial support, and otherwise. Besides Nicole Miller, Justin Silvers, and George Corney, Jordan, if you want to introduce Jordan from Bernstein, our host here today. Jen McCahill from GRF, you just raise your hand. Another member of our Nonprofit Advisory Board. Christina Ryan from Partment Executive Advisors. Stephen Glenn Devenish from your part-time controller. Steve Plater from TPO Human Resource Management. Dan Blaine from Marketing Running. And Ashley Grubby from Payroll Network.
I'll be Ashley Grubby.
Just to get some. All right, so thank you to all of you. Next, I want to turn it over to, I think I never pronounced your last name, right?
You're in good company.
So this is Executive Director Donna from FAR, our co-host here today. Donna wanted to say something.
I'm the comedic act before the main show. How's that? Thanks, Jeff. My name is Donna Shafali, and I'm the Executive Director of FAR. And all of you have heard FAR a couple of times. And first, let me, before I even get into that, say thank you to Jeff, who is a FAR member, and Nicole, a FAR board member, and Justin, a FAR member. There are many FAR members here. Danielle, our chair, is here. So FAR is a nonprofit organization that serves the business leaders. And in fact, we are celebrating, if you notice on your badge, our 40th anniversary. Woo! And they said it wouldn't last. Going through COVID, we all had our questions. We really did. So FAR, of course, as I mentioned, is we focus on serving the nonprofit business leaders in the Washington, D.C. area. And this includes, as most all of you know, webinars and in-person events similar to this. And we focus on the financial management, IT, and human resources. And we are thrilled to be able to partner with the Nonprofit Advisory Board, as you heard, all of who was introduced. They're all, I believe, members of FAR today. So I have to tell you, though, and I apologize, Jeff, I'm going to take like another 2 seconds here. When I started in the nonprofit association business sector in 1973, staff was all working within a 30-mile radius. We'd all come in at the same time. We'd all leave at the same time, except for vacations and being sick and whatnot. And most importantly, our work was, I'd be on this electric typewriter, and that little ball would just dance at our fingertips, and we'd make Xerox copies, you know? And then we would fax really important stuff. Wow, it really was important. We'd go out to lunch with our colleagues. Yes, there were some of the 3 martinis. Yes, yes, yes. And the biggest challenge we had at that time was, what's next? Really, what is next? What can we do to serve our members next? What activity? What education? Fast forward to the 90s, internet comes online, the whole world is online. We adapted to the information superhighway. We were challenged by this as association members. Suzanne, I didn't see that. Sorry, I just now had the glasses. We were challenged by the information superhighway because all of a sudden, all those walls that were the association walls that became, our members came to us for the information. They came to us for the education. They came to us for the community. All of that was kicked down by the internet. And so now we are able to connect with everybody, individuals in real time, with just a little handheld device. So it comes to us as business leaders now, as we jump 30 years later into the pandemic, what we've been catapulted here. It's absolutely catapulted. The changes have been revolutionizing. The technological advances that we've seen in the last 3 years, normally under normal evolutionary times would have taken 10 years. And that's just how dramatic it's been. So the challenges we face in today's ever-changing landscape to stay relevant are difficult in the face of technological advancements, shifting priorities, and of course, competing interests. That's going to actually bring me to as part of the business leaders of nonprofits, it's falling upon us to help lead our organizations through these transformative times. So today, even though we know we have more than 5 challenges facing us, we have an august panel led by Jeff Tenenbaum, who we're going to address the most important challenges we have today. So on that note, thank you for allowing me to say those few words, and thank you everybody for being here. And I hope you all join Mark.
All right, real quick before we dive in. First up, I maybe forgot to introduce myself more fully, but I'm Jeff Tenenbaum, managing partner with the Tenenbaum Law Group. We're a 4-lawyer boutique law firm based in DC that focuses exclusively on representing nonprofits and associations and outside counsel. I'm going to introduce our speakers here in a second, but our program, even though it's titled The Top 5 Challenges Facing Nonprofit CEOs Today, it's actually more than 5. There's a lot more challenges than 5, more than 10, more than 20, but we're actually going to talk about a little more than 5 today, but we are going to talk about some of the most pressing challenges, things like successful strategies for flexible remote work arrangements, board relations and member relations, employee talent management and retention, dealing with public policy challenges, incorporating new revenue models, budgeting in times of uncertainty and uncertain financial markets, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're going to try to get through all of this in about an hour and 5 minutes. And we are going to, as I told our speakers when we had our prep calls, I'm going to ask them to keep their answers as concise as possible, but obviously full enough to be able to pass on some meaningful information. It's going to be kind of a rapid fire, bounce around, asking different panels, different questions, having others chime in. And then I want you guys to feel free at any time to raise your hands and ask multiple questions and try to get through as many different topics as we can. So first, let me introduce our distinguished panelists, and I unfortunately not going to have the time to go through and read their distinguished bios. They're all extremely accomplished nonprofit and association CEOs, all folks I had the privilege of working with, and they're really just amazing, and I'm really grateful. Some went to great lengths, including red eyes and other things, to rearrange schedules to get here. And I'm not exaggerating when I say getting the prep call on the calendar and getting this thing on the calendar was the most challenging scheduling my system has ever had to go through. It was
collectively sorry.
They have extremely busy schedules, and by the way, you all have amazing assistants. To my far left, Michelle Korsmo, President and CEO of the National Restaurant Association. To her right is Jonathan Webb, CEO of the Association of Women's Health, Obstetric and Neonatal Nurses. Keith Woods, CEO of the American Institute of Architects. Kate Fry, CEO of America's Blood Centers, and Jeff Crystal, Executive Director of the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. I purposely pulled together a diverse group in terms of kind of all aspects of diversity, from the size of the organization to trade versus professional association versus, non-association nonprofits like Jeff's group. And I think I wanted to be able to showcase those different perspectives. And I have no doubt you will not be disappointed today. So with that, we're going to get into it. And the first question I'm actually going to pose to Jonathan and to Lakeisha. We both talked about these issues, and you both have some really interesting insights and examples in this front. So, Jonathan, first, how have you gone about infusing diversity, equity, and inclusion into your organization's work?
Yeah, well, thank you for the question and the invitation for being here. There are a couple of things that we started. So one, we have started with a place that, given where we are as a society, we can't be in a position where we are comfortable with complacency around how we make people feel welcome. So it's no longer acceptable to not be what I consider anti-organizations, anti-racist, anti-sexist. So all the things that we have done to start with men, because we don't want anything we have done, we try to. So when I started with organizations here, we went through this process where we had listening tours. We engaged with our members, those who were with us, those who left us and had stated they left because they didn't feel like they belonged. We also talked to partners who had expressed some concern. And we really, in one respect, listened to the concerns they had. And in cases where we had made missteps, we apologized. So we can at least try to move at the speed of trust where people knew we were serious about what we were trying to do and acknowledging some of the wrongs that we were doing either directly or indirectly and not wanting to perpetuate some of the systemic challenges that we had been doing in the past. So what we did with that, once we got information back from all those different stakeholders, we started to put together what we called a DEI roadmap. We identified specific areas of opportunity for us to lead in, like how we significantly diversified our membership, how we significantly would diversify our volunteer leadership, how we might take action and stances on different political issues that were important to our members and the members that we wanted to be engaged with us, how our HR policies were much more inclusive, how we looked at and challenged some of the systems and policies that were at play around us in a meaningful way, and also then how we looked at contracting with partners. So we went through this process, we built this DEI roadmap, we had a couple of iterations with it, where we then released it to our members for public comment and our partners for public comment, similar to some of the federal legislation that happens. And there was a mixed bag. We had some folks who were really excited about the work we were doing and some folks who were saying, well, DEI is not a really big issue, why are you talking about it? And for those individuals, we had offline conversations, the ones who are willing to engage, to better understand what their concerns were. At the end of that process, we landed with a really, in my opinion, a robust roadmap that had attached to it some very clear, actionable metrics that we were standing on. So if we were going to be looking to diversify our membership, what did that actually look like? What was the percentage we're at now? What does that look like in 2, 3, 4 years? If we're looking at actionable policies in terms of what vendors we worked with and how we were making sure that the money was flowing to different types of organizations that we engage with. What are we doing now? What's actionable that we can stand upon in the future? So we actually released this a year and a half ago. We started to build some of those metrics out. We're actually putting a member-facing dashboard connected to it so people can hold our feet to the fire and not feel like we're just, again, being performative or saying some of these things and not actually doing things behind it. And then we brought in a team, a VP of DEI and some team members to support. We're working with bringing some team members to support her to actually make this a reality so people can say that we are serious about what we're doing. Our serious thought around that is that in order for us as an organization that sets policies, guidelines, educational guidelines for our members, that we really need to make sure people are at the table. And also the last part I'll say, Jeff, trying to be as concise as possible, is making sure that as we move along this journey, we are very clear about how we're defining it. Because sometimes people default to race and ethnicity, which I think, personally speaking, is a really important place to be. But you can also have diversity, a lack of diversity exist with respect to clinical backgrounds, rural versus geography, rural versus urban. There can be all those types of challenges that exist. So we are really looking to make sure as we navigate some of the concerns with our members, that we expand that to not just have them land on race, but understand all the ways in which we're trying to engage as broad a population as possible and really be held accountable.
Thank you, Jonathan. Keisha, you want to share some of your experiences at AIA you guys have done in this area?
Absolutely. So one of the things that made me really excited about the opportunity of joining AIA little over a year ago was the fact that they had already put in writing in their strategic plan that they had two goals, and that was climate action for human and ecological health and racial and gender equity in the profession. And that's a pretty big goal to put in a 5-year strategic plan with 85% white men licensed architects. So they knew where their challenges lied, and they wanted to put it in writing and say, we're going to make an effort to move this needle forward. So for me, my job is to jump on board and make sure that we are creating the tools and resources in order to move the needle. We know we're not going to get to equity in 5 years. I mean, that would be a miracle, and we'd all be sitting back collecting lovely book rights or something. But but what's really important is that one, AIA started the process, long before George Floyd is what I like to refer to things as. That's when some of the companies decided to make changes. They created the Guides to Equitable Practice back in 2017, 2018. And those are tools for architecture firms to use for changes. It's broken down into 9 different sections: culture, bias, you name it. It's all the various issues that people will face and what steps they can take in order to improve the environment and belonging within their firms. I actually used to use that tool at my last association. You don't have to be an architect to find these tools useful, and they're free, so download them and share them with your firms by all means. But the other thing that they did is they were intentional about making changes to the structure of our board and how people are selected, to the structure of not just who our award winners are, but if you notice that they noticed, all of our award winners seem to be of one race. Well, who are the people selecting those award winners? So they looked at the juries and they made changes to how they selected juries. And they are very intentional about trying to make sure that all voices are heard and everybody has a seat at the table. And so I love that they had already put some of those processes in place. I think one of the first things I had to do actually was look at our own team. And so if you looked at a picture of our 200 staff people, sure, we're DC, it looks pretty diverse, but if you looked at our leadership team, it was 85% white. And there was this is DC. How do you not have more diversity? Where was our excuse? So one, educating our members on what diversity means, what they're looking for. Oftentimes they'll say, well, what percentage of racial breakdown and gender breakdown do I need to have within my firm? And I always tell them, your organization should be a representation of the area in which you represent. So we're a national organization, we're DC based. We need to make up the spectrum of America, right? When I look at numbers and percentages and things like that. But for somebody who's in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, right, your firm is based there, you're gonna have a different makeup of your team. So it's just a matter of really reflecting and understanding. And so the fact that they, again, put data to it, but on top of that, I was just at a meeting with our large firm roundtable, so the people who run the largest architecture firms in the country, and they are all now creating reports. And they said to me, well, we just got our data. It's not pretty, but at least we have the data and we know where we need to go from here, right? What's your baseline? What does it look like? Some are great. The gender breakdown is now at some of these large firms, 60% women, right? And coming out of architecture schools, it's 50-50 for the most part. But again, we're looking at the licensed architects, and with 85% being white men, they know that we have to do more than just bring them into our firm, but we need to make them feel like they belong, that they have a voice, so that they stay, they work the path of licensure, and they stay within the profession, and they are elevated to leadership levels. So we just keep reinforcing the fact that when you have more diversity at your leadership team, not just in your firm, not at your entry-level positions, but in your leadership team, more women and more minorities, you are more innovative and you are more financially successful. It is a fact. So it's not about the right thing to do, it's the proper thing.
Thank you, Acacia.
So before you leave that, one thing I want to bring up on this topic is we talked about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're really working on also including the A, right? People have started and Michelle, it's not just the power of A for associations, but that accessibility part of it. So you really talked a lot about, that thinking about that inclusion. Part of thinking about that inclusion is the accessibility. We just had a great event with our high school students that have gone through culinary training programs, and we brought in a couple of administrators from deaf schools to learn more about how we can help include deaf curriculum or improve our curriculum to meet the deaf community. And one of the things that I had as a big takeaway is that American Sign Language is not English signed. It's actually a different language. So you can't, if you're at a conference and you put the closed caption up on the screens for what's happening with the people on the stage, that's good for people that are hard of hearing, but it's a different language than people who are native American Sign Language speakers. And so there's a lot to think about from that perspective too. And I think as we start to think, and that's one example of what that aid looks like, is we start to think more broadly about diversity, equity, and inclusion, that accessibility piece, I think is really a great place for us to be too.
If I can quickly add to that, I think that's underscoring that. I think that's one of the reasons why it's important to have different people at the table, at your membership level, at your leadership level, because if you start to build out solutions without the people who are impacted by them at the table, then you may make a mistake and do something you think is actually helping, and you end up missing the
missing the mark. Totally.
Great, thank you. All right, we're gonna switch to this side of the room. Sorry for the kind of odd setup today, but it's not intentional. But we're gonna shift to an issue that everyone's dealing with these days, which is kind of the remote and hybrid work situation. Except Kate's been dealing with this for years prior to COVID. We'll get to that in a second. But Jeff, you and I have worked on these issues really from day one of the pandemic. And I know you're still struggling with the balance, and it's evolving like everyone else. Remote work policies and practices are evolving. There's certainly a lot of legal considerations as well, which is why when I talk a lot about it, but just to me, most of the important considerations are non-legal. So how do you at NIPWIC balance kind of the evolution of policies around in-office and remote work or partial work?
So Jeff, first, thank you for doing this, and I appreciate you forcing us all to. As you know, early in the pandemic, like everyone, we were transitioning from an office that was fully in office to a full remote environment. So I had run roughly an organization of 200 people. During the pandemic, there were two of us that had to come to the office every day in order to sort of keep the financial piece of the organization still running. And from that experience of being fully remote, there were a couple of things to take into consideration. First, the world had changed, people's lives had changed, but also how board interaction with staff had changed pretty dramatically. Now, we were very fortunate. We were able to move our IT systems very, very quickly, not miss the Word organization that grows at a rate of about 20% annually. So sustaining an environment which switched from an all present to virtual and still be able to keep up the ability to respond to the demand for growth on us was really important. We were able to achieve this challenge. Really going into year two, though, we started struggling. Now, we also have a very low return rate within my organization. It's generally about 3 to 5%. But we're adding 20 to 25 people on a regular basis. So recruitment, training, getting people culturally integrated, because we also have an organization that we try to grow talent from within and promote from within. So early on, once we were coming back, we went through sort of a very hard process early on, telling folks that if your life had changed and if you didn't see yourself coming back, which we always talked about that we would be coming back, that we knew that we were going to go into a hybrid schedule. We were going to be something that was going to be blended. It ended up being 3-2 for now. It's really based on having people in the office all at the same time, so people are familiar with each other. We're getting that exchange of ideas. We choose to do Monday through Wednesday and then Thursday, Friday as a flex opportunity. It has obviously been a recruitment challenge at times, but we're also pretty blessed that I would say I get on average about 500 applicants for every opening that we have, and I would say that we cull that down to the top 3 to 5, and we're a place people want to come. I don't think that's at all normal, so it hasn't. So it's a burden in a good way, right? But I understand that hybrid doesn't work for other people, and I'll tell you, probably my greatest struggle hasn't been at the staff level; it's been at the board level, where the board strongly believes that it should be an organization that has people in the office 5 days a week. And one, I think it's unnecessary, and two, I do think it would become a recruitment problem at that point. And if there's a silver lining out of COVID, it's an opportunity to make some very unorthodox, unexpected changes in a positive way, and giving people back some of the personal time or some of the flexibility or time with family is an unbelievably positive outcome that technology and societal change has opened the window to right now. But as Jeff knows, that's not been 100% positive from some people's viewpoints from within, right?
And you layer on top of that, his board they're all board members are appointed by the Secretary of the Interior, vetted by the White House right behind us.
I have a very complicated,
it's a
30-person board, so
it's challenging.
Diverse.
Thanks, Jeff. So Kate, your organization, America's Blood Centers, went fully remote in 2017, is that right? So what led, obviously nothing to do with COVID, what led to that decision, and kind of what have you learned from it? What are some of the challenges or the opposite successes been?
Sure. So I think it's probably one of the few times in my life that I consider myself a trendsetter. And that, we were one of those early adopters of going fully virtual. I had just taken over as CEO and was given a directive that I had to cut a third of my budget overnight. And so there's only so many parts of your balance sheet that you can do that from. And so part of it was staffing and part of it was our physical location. We had a great location here in downtown DC and decided to go fully virtual. And so it's been quite a journey for us. I think a lot of lessons learned prior to going fully virtual. We had a staff of 20. We actually cut back down to 6 and now have rebuilt back up to 11. So I am filling that quota of a small association on this panel. Part of that change was outsourcing HR, IT, and finance. When we went fully virtual, we didn't feel like we needed those in-house in a virtual environment. And so that was a great decision for us. I think some of our biggest takeaways have been that you shouldn't do it for the money. It is too hard of a process to do it for the dollars alone. And you have to invest way more in sustaining an organizational culture in a virtual environment than you would ever think, because it doesn't come natural like you do when you have it. You have to be a lot more intentional about your interactions with your employees, among your employees, about how do you recreate those water cooler moments in a virtual environment? How do you transition your social norms virtually? So as simplistic as it is, things like reminding people when you sign on in the morning, don't bombard me with Teams chats about everything you need from me. Say hi, right? Ask me how my weekend was. It seems so natural when you're in person. It takes a lot more intention in a virtual environment. We were very lucky that our board was extremely supportive of this change, which is interesting because we represent an industry that never went virtual during the pandemic, right? You can't collect blood virtually. You can't process blood and ship it to a hospital virtually. And so there's this, this drastic difference between their association. So we are very intentional about how we project ourselves to our members, realizing that whether it's just simply our Zoom backgrounds or, the response times, things like that. But it has been a big success for us, a lot of hard work. We're not perfect at it. I will say I've had one employee leave in 7 years. And I think it's a lot about our organizational culture. They love, right? They realize that they're still part of a team. Isolation is a real thing for everybody, especially though in a virtual environment, especially when you have people coming from a non-virtual environment into one. So turnover has been a big success for us. We are attracting candidates that we would never be able to afford otherwise. So people taking 30% pay cuts in titles just to be able to work in this kind of environment. And, you know, I was going to say one more thing, but, you know, so, you know, just in terms of, we feel like we are more responsive, better aligned. I will say when we first went virtual, we used a co-sharing space because we thought we still needed to maybe get together every 2 weeks. At that time, our staff was mainly here in DC, just because we had been in person. What we found is there's absolutely a time that you have to get your staff together in person. You can't cut that out completely. So we still do staff retreats twice a year, but it's not nearly as frequent as we thought. We actually did away with those every 2-week meetings because it was like, this is just taking up time that's not productive. We'd much rather really focus on those productive times. So that has been one of our other big lessons learned, I would say.
Thank you, Kate. Lakeisha, kind of on the same topic, your headquarters down the street here is been under renovation for what, a year or two, and I don't know.
Just starting, yeah.
Oh, it's just started, but you have 2 years to go, right?
2
roughly.
years to go.
So how have you dealt with these challenges of, you know, and pre-COVID, you guys were, you know, fully in person for the most part. So how have you dealt with the challenge of all of a sudden, you know, being fully remote? How do you deal with some of the challenges that Kate was talking about?
As I kept saying, I wonder if I'll ever be a CEO in an office. I don't know, because I came from NIPS. I started at NIPS and they went remote after, you know, of course, COVID. One thing that when I started at AIA, they basically told people, we're going to open the office next month. So I started and they said, what are you going to do? Because we keep pushing the open date a month. And so it's February of last year and we needed to have the office empty by September. Like, why would we bring people back who've been home for 2 years into an office that is going to be closed in 6 months? I need them to come back and get their stuff, and take it out of here. But I don't need them to come into the office. And so, but at the time, they also did virtual all staff meetings. So, you know, the Zoom with 200 people is always so much fun. And so what we decided to do when we were formally and officially, the office is nothing but, you know, a shell. We decided that our all staff meetings will no longer be virtual and they're only in person. And so once a quarter, we started with our December, you know, holiday / whatever, winter festival, we're supposed to call it these days, gathering. And we said, this is what it's gonna be. We're gonna bring our teams together. Departments will have big department meetings every quarter in person. And you should also, of course, meet with your individual teams more frequently, some in person, some virtual, but each team had to make up their own mind. But we told people that we're going to be flexible. Now, what I wasn't going to be flexible in is all the places they could move to. I told them our building's going to be under renovation for 2 years. I don't expect everybody to come back to the office. I think it's unrealistic. So I actually, and also they redesigned the space and all the senior team that all had offices, there wasn't space for them to have offices. And so I had asked my predecessor, who was still a part of our building committee, so what did you tell the senior team how did you tell them that they weren't gonna have offices? Because that's not my job anymore. So instead of calling people saying, by the way, you're not gonna have an office in our new building, I had them send a staff survey and said, in an ideal world, what would you prefer? Work 100% remote, come into the office every single day, or come in 1, 2, or 3 or more days? Like and if you say, I'm gonna come into the office 3 or more days, then you will have a dedicated workspace. And in doing that survey, what we found is 20 people wanna be fully remote out of 200. 20 people want to come in every single day. And then everybody else is somewhere in between. But what it did do is it automatically narrowed my senior team into the number of offices I actually had left. So they self-selected, and I said, you're gonna get what you asked for. If you wanna be fully remote, you could do that. However, all staff meetings, you still have to come back to DC or wherever we're gonna have it. And you have to come on your own dime because we're gonna pay you DC wages. So if you move to Florida or the sticks in Carolina, enjoy that lower rate, fly your butt back to DC, I'm not paying for it. So that was one of the rules, or I will pay you your local wages. And then also there were certain states that are on the no list. California, Texas, sorry, there's crazy laws, the HR, I can't, we can't keep up with them, we can't expect our like 3-person HR team to maintain all the rules and regulations in every state. So we have yes states, no states, and a couple of question marks that come up, but everybody's consistent. And to me, it was about being consistent, but also making sure that that time that we have together, that they get a balance, that we have some fun, that they get their work done, we're meeting with their teams. And I found that so far has been good. I just started doing a series of listening sessions with the teams without their managers on the call. So much fun. So don't tell me that it's an age thing as to why you have to be virtual, because it's the young people who bought an efficiency apartment in DC that want to go into the office.
Yeah.
Like, I want to see people, anybody get together, like, oh, why aren't we having more social, just gather? I will literally call people that I work with and go, hey, let's get together tomorrow and we'll just go work from some coffee shop. Or, some people who like got together in a Harris Teeter and they're upstairs and then they ended at the bar later. So finding those social connections, people still need to have them, so don't forget it. But you have to give people flexibility. And I'm like, you choose your days, and then you share an office with the person. If you want to do Tuesday, Thursday, and they want to do Monday, Wednesday when we come back, great. Then you two will share this office, and then you have your own space. You're not sharing it actually on the same day. But just finding flexibility is going to be really important when we come back, and keeping personal connections and in-person connections and fun virtual connections, because our HR teams created some games and whatever where people could just water cooler chat virtually every other week or whatever, just so that there's still, again, more, are you okay? Checking in. Personal.
I'm not going to belabor the points. I think everyone here has touched on some really good pros and cons and some suggestions. One thing a new thing I want to toss out there for anyone who is considering going remote or is remote. One of the things that we've done, because we're fully remote now, we're not going to go back into the office, go through some of the same strategies that have been suggested here. We're going to have some space available for people to come in and meet. One of the things that we didn't consider on the front end and are now doing more work around it for those of you who are considering this is increased training around cybersecurity. I don't know if that's just something we're experiencing, but we have a really solid IT team who has picked up on a couple of things, and they're getting an email from someone who's asked, who said, Jonathan said, we're going to be recognizing board members, send me $1,000 worth of Amazon gift cards. And in a normal environment, you could walk down the hall and say, hey, Jonathan, you want these gift cards? Now, because there's an extra couple of steps involved in that, people might just click, and we actually had one person who got caught up in it. So we started to increase our training in some of the emails, the test emails to folks. So that's, if you're considering moving to remote, I think you should also consider what you do, the policies you have around training for cybersecurity.
Yeah, our IT team sends us out quarterly to staff, like fake gotcha emails. They sent me one. I was like, I didn't click on this. What do you mean I didn't training? I hope to see. Oh yeah, no, wrong. That's not a real email.
Just back to a couple of things Lakeisha said, in case any of you were wondering from a legal perspective, yes, it is permissible to have no states say you can, remote work from any state except California or Texas. That's absolutely fine. Yes, it's fine if you want to adjust people's wages based on where they're living, based on the cost of living. Yes, it's fine to require a staff who choose to live, say, outside the DMV area to travel back to, here in DC or wherever quarterly on their own dime. But in all instances, it's really important to treat similarly situated employees consistently and objectively. You have to, now if you're going to make it voluntary and everyone can do what they want, that's fine. But most associations aren't doing that. Most nonprofits aren't doing that. Most have some mandates. And I'd say similarly situated employees, doesn't mean every employee has to be treated the same. Depending on job function, some might be okay to be fully remote, some might not. But when you start making exceptions and not treating similarly situated people objectively and consistently, that's when you get to discrimination claims.
And that was the reason I did it, because there were like 11 people that were formally approved to be remote before. And they would pay for them to come up to DC, but then nobody else, even though there was other people at the same job. I'm like, who's this best friend? No, we're gonna be consistent. We're gonna treat everybody the same. If this type of job can be remote, then these are the rules, and this is what you agree to when you sign on to be a part of the organization.
And be very clear, you communicate your policies in writing. You know, I deal with, aggrieved employee claims all the time for clients, including most of you guys here. And that's one of the complaints we hear sometimes, that we don't even know what the policy is. And, the person down the hall from me is getting, gets to work, remote as much as they want in the office. So that, just keep that in mind.
How are you treating where you've seen a decline of productivity? So, I mean, like you've noticed, like maybe one certain person that's just not as responsive as when they're in the office. Like they'll spend 2 days in the office and 3 days working remotely, but those 3 days, it just seems like it's really far between, like, you get in your responses or you just kind of.
Yeah, that's a great question. So for your remote workers who are not as productive on the remote work days, and I hear that a lot. I hear, one client last week told me this one employee who they're terminating, she basically worked remotely every Friday, but she barely worked. Kind of took it as a 3-day weekend. So for any of you, how do you deal with that challenge of how have you dealt with kind of the challenge of the unproductive remote worker? Anyone?
Okay. I would just tell everybody, be very direct and have very open lines of communication. Now, I have had board members criticize me. They think I should be tracking individual computers and looking at productivity through the organization and all that kind of crap. Not happening. Yeah, well, the hedge fund guys, So the reality is all of our businesses are open and we all have responsibilities that we have to do. And if we're going to provide flexibility and provide remote environments for folks, which I advocate for, it's a responsibility of the employees to make certain that we are maintaining the productivity and the outcomes that we all need to do. And when you start sensing or seeing, we're pretty aggressive at working with the managers and talking it through with the employee and trying to understand. And at the same time, I'm not forcing an employee to work remotely. So if it isn't working by trying to do it remotely, then maybe they should think about changing it up. Come into the office and there's a few of us around, or is there something we can be doing with them in their environment that they're creating at home or wherever that is better? And I have to say, 9 times out of 10, just having a conversation and really trying to identify, I'm not blaming. It's just a reality that it's hard. It's new to all of us. And I've been successful just by talking it through. Now I've had a couple that I've had to let go of, sadly.
And to that point, it's really, nonprofits and associations are notoriously bad at performance management and specifically documenting poor performance. That example I told you about before, that the employee that my client was letting go, who was basically taking the 3-day weekends and had a lot of other performance issues. She'd been there for a decade. I looked at the performance evaluations. They were glowing for 10 years until 3 months beforehand. And that's a big problem. So look, Jeff has had great success motivating employees and getting them to be responsible and productive when they're working remotely, but it's not going to be the case with everyone. And whether it's remote work issues or other issues, any performance management. Donovan, you and I had some recent discussions about this. It's so important that you document the poor performance of the employees on a contemporaneous basis. You can't be so nice. Nonprofits executives are so nice. They're too nice. Sometimes they don't want to hurt people's feelings. They don't want to cut into their salary increases or bonuses, but you have to do it, because then when I get the call, Jeff, we need to terminate this employee, and we go through everything. Damn it, last 5 years, but the record doesn't, and it wasn't communicated to the employee either, or put on a performance improvement plan. Did you have something?
One of the things I would say to add to that, because I've found working with employees that are supervising others that don't want to be direct or have a hard time, is I want to see more of this behavior, I want to see less of this behavior as a framework for starting the conversation. So in the example of a person that's not responsive, I need to see more of you responding to my emails within 15 or 20 minutes. I need to see less of you doing a whole bunch of work and sending it all out at one time, because that's not productive. I need to see more of you joining in on a call. I need to see less of you not putting your video on. Like, those are the kinds of statements I think people can say that feel more approachable than, why are you showing up? Like, I can't hear from you. That's the question. So I think framing it in the see more of this and less of this, and it gives, I hope, Jeff and others that have to then get to the point of dealing with a termination, a little bit of material to work with on, they told you they needed to see you perform here, and you just didn't come through.
But that's really, really important to do, but coupled with it, there has to be contemporaneous documentation. Yes, communicated to the employee and documented.
And then email, and it's simple, right, Jeff? I mean, it could be me emailing HR. I just had a conversation with Michelle, and she, we talked about this, and I told her I needed to see this.
That's fine, and then, HR, copies that email, puts it into the employee's folder. Yeah.
So it's also about making sure that your company is giving managers the training they need for this new environment. And so we have our HR team focused on, people were working remote and it came out of nowhere, and then all of a sudden they're still there, but they never learned how to work in a remote environment. And so are we providing the resources to make them more successful? I started last year, one of the things people told me at my listening tour, staff members, nobody's accountable. Nobody's accountable. It's like accountability, lack accountability. Okay, so I put a lot of accountability in place. They're like, whoa, hold on. They need to be accountable. I don't need to be accountable. So it's about telling, my senior team and asking them, how are your managers managing their employees? How are you tracking their time? How are you, not necessarily tracking, because I don't care if you work from 6 a.m. till whatever time, or from 10 till 8 p.m. We have our core hours. They're done. Everybody needs to work in those 4 hours. They still exist wherever your office may be. But also, what work product, what are our goals? These are the things we need to accomplish this week, this month. If they're getting those goals accomplished, great. But also having the follow-up with managers to say, when they say, this person on my team, they're overworked, they need a new position. Okay, what are they working on? How long does that take? How does it tie back to our mission, our priorities? And what's the new role supposed to do? And just make sure, again, you're accountable. I trust you. Work with your team member to make sure this is what we need. And then they go in and they dig and they start asking that employee more questions. They come to find out they didn't want to actually do their work anymore, so they were trying to create a new position to basically take what was already on their job description and hand it off to somebody else. I'm really glad you asked me to follow up about exactly what they're doing versus what the new person was doing, because I realized they were actually just trying to create another position so that they didn't have to do the work they didn't do. So just asking questions, and then also making sure you're providing managers the training they need to work in a remote environment.
There's a lot of different trainings that nonprofit associations provide to staff. A lot of really important training, anti-harassment, bias training, things like that. But this is right up there to me with one of the most important trainings, and that's performance management training for your managers. If this is, it's not instinctive, and I'm not, HR maybe it's instinctive, you give that HR staffers, but for the managers, there's something instinctive about this. So you need to give them good training, and not some robotic, watch some video for an hour kind of thing, but real, practical, hands-on, and ideally in-person training. It's really
I would just say as a virtual person, we've really tried to lean into the realities of what working from home looks like, whether it be the good or the bad of that. So the bad being boundaries are really tough when you're working from home. right? Because you don't have, and we talk a lot about transition strategies, right? You have that transition strategy when you're coming home from the office and you have a 20-minute commute to kind of regroup and bring your full self to your next job when you get home. You don't have that when it's literally just walking out of one room into the next room. You know, in my case, I go from being a CEO to a mom in 20 seconds every day, and that is hard. So we talk a lot about that with our staff, no matter what they look like. You know, and we are a video on culture. That was a very intentional decision that we made. But even that, it's, you know, showing up on video when you're remote isn't the same as showing up on video when you're in the office. I don't care if you come in a t-shirt, you know, with your hair wet. I just want to see you. And that made people really uncomfortable at first, right? They were like, but I don't look good. I don't want to be on video. Like, I don't care. But if I was in the office, I would see you when we had this conversation. I need that same experience. And so getting people to understand that when people's kids were home, when the schools were closed, we actually bought headsets for all the kids, right, that were at home with the parents so that they could be part of calls. We were like, it's too hard for these parents to try to pretend that they're not at home and dealing with 18 things. So let's embrace it as an organizational culture and not fight these things that our remote employees are working with and the struggles they're having. And so I just thought I would share because it's kind of the opposite side of that. And we keep core hours, but other than that, you're free to do whatever you want. You can take up to 4 hours a day in flex time to run your errands, to go do your laundry. That's part of the benefits of working home from home. We can't not recognize that that's what people want. But at the same time, we keep those, you know, we have those norms in place to still make sure that work's getting done.
That's great. All right, we're going to shift gears. There's a few other topics I'm sure we'll cover. So, Michelle, next question is for you. Your association, you're relatively new. How long have you been there?
A year as of
A year already.
Tuesday. Yeah.
Yeah, Michelle and I worked together when she was CEO of Wine and Spirits Wholesalers of America. Took over a year ago as CEO of National Restaurant Association, which, you know, is well known and respected for having a very a large, successful advocacy and lobbying campaigns and arms and whatnot here in DC. So in the current kind of communications and political environment, how do you approach your advocacy work to be the most effective for your industry?
It's interesting because everybody talks about as politics changed, and it has and it hasn't, right? So it's changed in the noise, it's changed in the media angle, clicks, right? The desire to have kind of outrageous headlines. And so there's much more of a need to be aware of what those outrageous headlines look like and what they do for you as an organization and your advocacy. But when you get down to it, the work of advocacy remains the same in that it needs to be very personal. So without a doubt, I think that we've almost gotten too excited about all of the different nuances and changes and the excitement of the way advocacy can work in a much more connected technological environment and lost the real value in those personal connections. I think that the work that we do to connect our members as associations, to connect our members with policymakers and elected officials is the most important work we do for them. As we know, we have competitors for almost everything we do as trade associations, for-profit competitors, often in those environments, except for the advocacy environment. That's the only space where we really can shine and do that work on our own. And so the more you can set up a very traditional, in many ways, advocacy shop where you have connections with each member of Congress and your members, each elected officials, and you're bringing those members of Congress. It's great in the restaurant industry to invite somebody to come to a restaurant who doesn't want to do that, right? So to bring those elected officials into the restaurants, meet the employees, talk about the issues, meet the operators, meet the managers, go through that process, build those connections. That work remains the same. What has changed is the way we handle our external communication about our advocacy. And so much of that really involves having a really comprehensive media strategy where you're looking at all of the conversation that's taking place in your space about advocacy issues that you care about, and then figuring out what you need to respond to and what you don't. But we have a pretty robust system of monitoring activity And then we categorize each of those types of activities, a tweet by a reporter, a tweet by a policymaker, a tweet by just a regular consumer American. And based off of kind of who those people are and what they're saying, we make decisions on, are we going to monitor it and follow it? Are we going to see if it goes anywhere? Are we going to respond? Are we just going to keep this as something that happened and move on from there? And all of that process of really looking at and then deciding what bucket you're putting that type of activity into, and then what happens next and how you keep following that activity, I think is really important, because that work will affect what's happening from an advocacy perspective.
Jonathan, given the very challenging political landscape these days, especially with respect to women's health and reproductive rights, how has your association approached your advocacy efforts, as well as engaging those with differing and passionate viewpoints?
Yeah, thank you for the question. If you can picture it, I don't know how many of you are like Golden Girls fans, but I was a big Golden Girls fan. So you can picture it, right?
That's something I didn't expect to hear today.
So picture June 2022, and we had been doing some work, obviously, for several months leading up to it, and we were prepared for the Dobbs decision to come down while we were having our largest national convening at our convention. And our convention kicked off on Tuesday, and that Monday, I think the ruling came out, and it took the entire, as you can imagine, took the entire room by storm. And we had prepared already to provide some space and opportunity for our members to have quiet space, whether, depending on what side of the issue you're on, to have some quiet space and some opportunities for them to process what had just happened. We also, because we knew we were expecting the worst, we created an environment where we had built into our programming an opportunity for us to have a town hall. And I conducted a town hall with my then president, and we just heard people's raw reactions to the ruling, and then tried to put a spin or shift on it to ask them what they would expect or want from an organization like AWHY, my organization, in supporting their position. Thankfully for us, we had done some work and had already put out a public policy statement that was 10 years old. We've been revising it, that we were in firm support and belief that the decisions around reproductive rights should be made between, the reproductive decision should be made between a healthcare provider and an informed patient. So we could stand on that and not dip into the political waters of pro-life versus pro-choice, but right down the middle, that the person who is most informed and most in a position to make those decisions is the patient with the care team. So we had that to stand on. As you can imagine, because we serve we have about 25,000 members and represent the voices of about 377,000 nurses. Just like our country, it's a really polarizing topic, and there's some who are challenging and attacking us for having that position, and there's some who are applauding us for having that position. So we tried in that town hall meeting to keep our focus on the fact that this was a long-standing position. We needed to make sure that from a healthcare perspective, a doctor and a patient having access to a full suite of medical resources was what was best for the patient. So we took that stance. We've been taking that stance, and a lot of our advocacy efforts have been through and in coordination with partners. Part of the lead up to that ruling was for us to engage with groups like the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, the nurse midwives, the women's nurse practitioners in women's health, so that we could have a unified, because we were all in agreement. We wanted to have a unified stance on what the issue was. So we had resources available for our members who wanted to advocate. We had this coalition who was putting out briefings and educational information to how people can get engaged. And that's worked really well for us. The challenge that we've had, as you can imagine, is we've had some members who have said, regardless of the healthcare challenge, and the healthcare, having access to full suite of healthcare resources, we don't support what you're trying to do, and the people who chose to leave the organization because of those issues. because of that stance. So what we've tried to do for individuals is, even though we're standing firm on our policy, even though we're still advocating in partnership with these other organizations, because we believe it's in the best interest of our patients and our patient nurses to do so, we try to create some space for individuals to at least express their concern around the issue. So we've created, as actually a part of our diversity, equity, and inclusion work, special interest groups. So individuals that have a strong opinion about whatever the issue might be, they have an opportunity to engage, talk, and maybe share some thoughts with us, because our focus is that our thought is that even though you may be strongly against the position that we took, you're still going to be in a position to provide quality healthcare for someone who's going to be in your state asking for care. So the strategy was to not just simply make a statement, even though we have our own personal beliefs, to not just simply call people out and move on. We really want to call people in and try to engage them as best we could, because we knew they would still be in positions to either do harm to patients or support them going forward. So we wanted to toe the line and push our agenda forward, but still create an environment for people to engage and share their thoughts and concerns. That's worked fairly well.
Thank you. Kate, one last question I had to see if we're going to try to cover 2 more topics in the next 15 minutes. So everyone. Yes. So how did the pandemic change American Blood Center's approach to advocacy and ensuring that your public policy priorities?
I think 2 quick things. The fundamentals of advocacy are still there. You have to build those relationships early. You have to build them without knowing where they're going to be. I think for us, we found that the pace that we have to respond to things became so much quicker, whether it be regulatory changes or items on the Hill. And actually, we saw an intersection between advocacy and governance in this way. So just, Jeff, you know this example. We're a $3 million organization. We ended up having a $600 million federal contract to provide plasma around the country, convalescent plasma, during the pandemic. And so an agency that we had been meeting with for years in the basement of their building, without really knowing ever where it was going to come, called us on a Friday night and said, "We need your help. We're not a contract, not like your organization. We don't deal with federal contracts." I have a 7-person board. That was one of the decisions we made when we restructured, is we went from 15 to 7. And so by Saturday morning, I had my full board support of us getting involved in this kind of an advocacy initiative and what we were going to be comfortable with doing. I would have never been able to move with that kind of speed, I think, had my governance not supported the ability to make policy changes and actions incredibly quick. And I think moving forward, we're going to just keep seeing that, right? Where we have to be able to respond either to the media, to politicians, to regulators, whatever it might be, with a new sense of urgency. I think the other big lesson that we have learned, we've actually decided to keep a virtual Hill Day. Before the pandemic, we'd have about 30 executives go to the Hill. As long as the Hill continues to support this, we just had it last week. We had a 400% increase in the number of people who could participate in this effort. And so we ended up actually making it an entire week. We ended up with 55 external partners, where before it was just us, sending people to the Hill one day. So we have really tried to embrace some of these changing norms and make them permanent. We'll see if that it continues to be, like I said, supported by congressional offices. But for now, it's working in a way that we can engage more people in a way that we were never able to before.
Great. Well, that's a nice segue to Jeff, who's sitting there very jealous of your 7-person board. Sure you are. But let's talk about boards, right? That's one of the things that makes nonprofits and associations unique is the role of the volunteer board, very different than the role of a board in a for-profit company. And for all of you, your boards are your bosses, and boards always pose challenges. Being able to work effectively with your board, getting them to support priorities of yours, is critical, but always challenging. So Jeff, in your situation, how has post-COVID, what are some of the ways that you're engaging differently with your board, and what are some of the ways you deal with some of the biggest board challenges?
So I would say, just for background, I have a 30-person board defined by the law that they serve 6-year terms. They're appointed by the Secretary of Interior, which really means they're White House cleared and approved. I got to the organization in 2005 at a moment where Wayne LaPierre had been appointed to the board, and the board was in the process of filing a lawsuit against the Department of Interior to challenge the appointment. So I came in at a moment where I had to get the politics to calm down and get the board and the White House to sort of cooperate. So we came up with a way that they entrusted me to sort of create a universe of people to be considered for the board, that we would focus on conservation and environmental. We would not look at politics. We would look at diversity, whether it was racial, gender, regional, and subsequently we've been able to build a pretty healthy, strong board that's focused on outcome. Now, I would say boards are all of our challenge in the sense that they come from a certain perspective and we come from an operator perspective. And the staff comes from yet another perspective. And all of us are the bridge to make all of those things balance and function and work with each other. COVID has been particularly challenging because different households and different people have gone through different types of experiences. Folks on my board tend to come from a business experience. And that means they tend to be profit oriented, not necessarily worker environment oriented. So as Jeff knows, it's been sometimes a cultural challenge to get everybody to hear each other and sort of find what is the right balance as we kind of work things through. And at the same time, I try to keep the political pendulum from sort of affecting the function of that board. And I think for the most part, Jeff also tends to come to a board meeting with me every August because we do pretty extensive legal training. They have quite a large responsibility. They have to approve literally every grant that goes through the organization. And we push out right now between $1 billion and $1.5 billion annually through 1,300 to 1,500 grants. So it's quite a commitment from those board members, and me getting them to be sort of comfortable in science and expertise that they're probably not as familiar with is really important to do. But just like we talk about employee training, manager training, board training is unbelievably important. So they know their role, they know their boundaries, but they also know how to effectively influence in a positive way the organization.
Thank you. Michelle, as CEO, your role encompasses working with your board to establish priorities for the organization and how do you going to clear through the clutter with all the issues that your association could potentially advance?
I think that this is every association, every industry has so many things to do. And the CEOs, we're all thinking about how we focus on the most important. I think about it really in terms of us being a curator, right? So in so much of what we're doing, we're really curating the issues to set priorities. And it's a lot of listening to your boards, right? Listening to your larger membership in addition to the boards, listening to the team that's involved in every part of the advocacy and every part of the member engagement connection, and then knowing what's going on from a public policy setting space, and then setting really clear direction. So I view my role as really defining what's the, I talk about it in terms of strategic pillars, right? Strategic pillars are our business plan. This is how we're going to win. So if we think about what we as an organization should be doing from a functional area, that's where I look at the strategic pillars and really defining who we want to be a wildly successful trade association. And then after that, it's really thinking about what are the issues that you're facing. And when I think about issues for us as an organization, I don't just think about food traceability issues or wage standard issues or hours of operation. I think about it more holistically in terms of what are our members thinking about every day. And they tend not to think
like we do in a very Washington-based way in terms of what's happening from a regulatory agenda or what's happening from a congressional agenda. And so we think about what those items are, what those topics are, but they have to connect back to what's going on in the day-to-day of our member companies. So for me, when I think about what's really driving the industry forward in the restaurant space, I think of it in terms of workforce. Obviously, workforce is a lot of finding new workers, finding more workers, being competitive. That gets into an immigration issue if we're talking about it from a public policy perspective. But if we're talking about it from the terms of how operators are thinking about it, yes, they want to think about immigration. And there are those that have visa programs where they're looking at how they can utilize those visa programs. But at the end of the day, they're also thinking about what do I do to make my work attractive to a potential workforce. And so then we have conversations about how are you creating the right culture within your organization to create that attractiveness? What are you doing to think about what workers today look for, which is often much different than what any of the hiring managers were looking for when they started looking for a job, right? So what you want out of a job may not be the same thing of the current workforce looking for out of a job. So there's one driving factor for our industry's workforce. Another one is thinking about, again, I'll go very quickly. So it's workforce. It's what's happening from a demand perspective. People want restaurant food almost anywhere and almost any time. And so how is that changing business? Obviously, there's a lot of regulations there. It's the factor of what's happening with digital as a fully integrated way of how we think about approaching our work in an innovative perspective, as opposed to just digital as in addition to what we're doing in the physical space. And then the last is the need for agility. As we're coming out of the pandemic, that agility is key. What we thought were pandemic trends of supply chain problems and difficulties in, in just kind of what our hours of operations are, back to workforce. You would think that all of those things kind of left with the pandemic. They didn't. And so agility is the mindset that people need to have. So we may deal with tariff questions, other things that relate from a public policy perspective area on each of these topics. But when we talk about the topics, our members, our board, are all thinking about it in terms of how it impacts them. And I think that's really the best place to be. So working with the board is coming up with what those driving factors are and then getting them to agree to it, see it, and then live and build all of our operational activity for the organization under that umbrella.
Thank you. That's great. All right, we're gonna get one last topic in the 5 minutes that we have left. Short answers, everyone. And then I'm gonna ask you this question, Jonathan, and then if anyone else wants to chime in or has any closing thoughts here for the panel. So how has kind of the changing resource landscape in your world and the pandemic kind of impacted your association's approach to both budgeting and strategic?
Yes, I'll build off Michelle's answer really quickly. So three ways. So one, we took our strategic plan and boiled it down and brought it down to a strategy mapping level. And we used a resource-based competitive advantage analysis. And what that did for us in a nutshell was have us look at what our value drivers are through the lens of our perfect customer. And we built some metrics connected to that. So when we have conversations with our board in terms of resource allocation and those kind of things, we're doing it through the lens of, okay, does this thing that we're making a decision around actually drive value? If it does drive value, how are we tying it back to a metric that we care about? And that really streamlined all of our conversations. And then how we connect it to budget on the backside of that is that we do continuous scenario planning and reforecasting. So because of the changing environment, we may think that this thing that people have told us is a valuable thing that we want to invest resources behind is going to get us X amount of dollars. If we do this, we want to have 3 or 4 different scenarios around it. So if we think it's going to hit at 100%, what's the net revenue we expect to get? It's going to hit at 90%, 80%, and we're constantly adjusting that scenario so we know what the best case and worst case scenarios might be. And then we reforecast on a really consistent basis. So we actually had this conversation with my finance team earlier. We don't want to be surprised in Q3 that we made an assumption in Q1 that was completely off and we can't go back and make any changes. So we connect those dots together so that we stay in control of 1, the scenario, and then 2, the response to the strategic.
That's great. Yeah.
Well, and if I can build on that with the strategic plan, when I came on board, they have an operations plan, right? So you have a strategic plan, and I'm sure many of you then build an operating plan that you work on that year. Well, in that operating plan, because everybody wanted to get in their most important project, they had 187 priorities. And
No priorities.
That's, which means, right, we do nothing exceptional, and
Yeah.
we're trying to focus on 187 things. So what we did this year is we created 5 priorities, and we went through a whole process to get there, right? With the team feedback, what are the things that are our core services, and gathering and weighting it on what, you know, who most benefits from the work that we're doing, and tying it down to those 5 priorities, taking that feedback not just from staff at all levels, but also our members, our board. When we announced what those 5 priorities were, it just completely resonated. Everyone said, yes. And so now everyone is working on putting how are we tracking quarterly updates? How are those 5 priorities doing? And then also come summer, it's time to work on what will next year's priorities be. Some may carry over. We may still be focused on redoing our website. This year got to beat up. When I first started, your website, get my, got it. Need to reassess. But a lot of things, just if you can focus and really get the team and then tell them that's where we're putting our dues, that's where we're putting our budget dollars, all around those resources. It doesn't include, HR is HR, legal, we still have to do those things, but actual projects, those other ones go away because this is where we're going to focus. And if you really stick to it, then the team will believe, okay, this is what we're going to do and what's going to be next year's focus. We have to focus, we cannot be all things to all people.
And just bolting on that really quickly, I think that doing that process through a lens of understanding what you do that no one else can do. What is when you establish your priorities or your competitive advantage, what is it that people are coming to you for that they can't get from other folks, and having that be the thing that you put your resources behind it?
Great point. So in closing, Jeff, any kind of new, different, innovative approaches in the last 2-3 years to budgeting and or strategic planning related to the pandemic and just kind of the changing resource environment? Let me ask you first, as the largest conservation grant organization in the country, and if any of you didn't notice, the 20% growth year over year is just unheard of.
I know everybody reads this all day long, every day right now, but AI is a dynamic that none of us sitting here today really understand what impacts it will actually have. And I'm not somebody that believes it's going to replace the American workforce in any way, but I do think it's going to change some of the way that we do things within office environments. And I definitely think it's going to bring a whole new level of security challenges that we haven't really prepared ourselves for yet. So if there's something that we're specifically sort of focusing extra effort in right now to try to understand, it's really what do we think those implications look like in the next 2 years and the next 5 years in the environment that we're working in.
Thank you.
I would just say for us, we are in the fortuitous position where we came out of the pandemic with much more reserves than we ever went into it with. And so we've done a lot of strategy planning around how we're going to use those reserves. There's a lot of concern that if we don't bring them down, actually, our members are going to push back against dues and why they continue to pay the same amount. And so we created what we call our strategic reserve fund. It allows us to use the interest income off our reserves each year to fund what, basically capital projects, not the same as capital for-profit, but things related to our strategic plan that otherwise wouldn't necessarily fall into our operating budget. And so it's given us a lot more freedom to experiment. We've done a lot of look at risk also related to that, and actually just completed a process where we incorporated that into our investment policy statements. So that is probably the most relevant piece to that question.
That is perfect. All right, 3 quick things and then we're done. First, speaking of AI and associations, a plug for a panel, an ASAE panel that I will be participating in next week, May 11th, on AI and association. executive staff planning call for it. This morning, I think it's going to be a great panel. I encourage those of you ASAE members to register.
Members as well.
And non-members as well. Thanks, Mary. And a number of ASAE staff here today. It's nice to see, including Michelle, who was here. Secondly, I want to thank our incredible panelists for just an outstanding job. I thought it was an incredibly helpful, insightful, practical, meaty discussion today with 5 different unique perspectives. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time. And then finally, the bar is open. There's some hors d'oeuvres out here. Enjoy, and feel free to go out on the rooftop. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.